Do you think I should?
Yeah.
Maybe you should
Go
bring
ahead.
us in.
No, you do it.
Okay, I'll bring us in. Hi, good morning. Welcome to Talking Point Live, coming to you live. Of course, how else would we be coming to
Not
anybody
dead.
at this point? We were talking about maybe turning it into Talking Point Comatose this morning, just given by the way I'm feeling. I don't know about you.
No, I feel pretty good.
I know our poor director has a headache going on too, but she's still switching away back there as things go. Talking Point Live, coming to you live from the campus of Dixie State University and the studios of the Community Education Channel. My name is Eric Young.
I'm Jennifer Kohler.
Got that right? That's good.
I do have that.
We're going right. And so today I've posted up 3 different posts on our Facebook page. And if you want to join us and chime in with who you think your favorite and most trusted journalists are, you're welcome to go through and add to the feed there. And that's kind of what we're talking about. But Jennifer and I have noticed a pattern here, I think, at least this is twice now, if not 3 times for this season, of us taking something that our students bring up in class, and that something kind of sticks with us, and then we talk about it, and then that becomes content to drive the show. And I like that idea that we're using student-driven content to show you what our students are talking about and thinking about.
Our students and your family members.
Or your peers, the people who you work with, or millennials.
Yeah.
Imagine that. We might be saying something positive here about that generation. So that was my surprise announcement. What was yours?
Well, I was just going to say I have to plug the continuing learning program here in town. I'm taking 3
classes, right?
3 night classes right now. 2 of them with Martin Knorr and 1 with Stan Johnson, and I am loving them.
Good.
Really, really getting a lot of value and enjoyment out of them. So if you haven't checked out the catalog of continuing learning, you might want to one of these days, and you're going to find, I think, some really valuable content at night with your peers in town. So
it's on Dixie State University's website. Lifelong learning, I think, is
it might be.
That way?
It might be.
And you're getting into web design, photography.
One's a digital photography. One is photo restoration and improvement. And even though I'm not restoring old photos, I took some photos of some older furniture, and I noticed when I looked closely there were a lot of wear and tear on the old pieces.
On the furniture itself?
I was repairing.
You're retouching furniture
really
digitally?
Yes, I was.
Okay. As you just do it with a magic marker.
Well, you could do that before you take the picture, right. But yeah, it's a great program. And so Eric was alluding to a comment I made to him, I think it was yesterday, about something one of my students had written to me this week. I offered an extra credit assignment for last Friday to my students in my 3 courses. And some of them actually went and heard McKay Coppins do a presentation. I probably had a dozen of my students there. And one of them, they were all written.
Let's let them know who McKay Coppins is.
Okay. He is currently a writer for The Atlantic magazine. But before that, he went to BYU and graduated from BYU. Then he went back east for an internship with Newsweek and did that for a while. And then in 2012, he wanted to cover presidential politics. And he wasn't going to get a shot at that at Newsweek because he was way down on the totem pole. So he left Newsweek, and at that point in time, BuzzFeed was starting its serious news gathering efforts. And so he went to work for BuzzFeed covering politics and went with the Romney campaign and other campaigns in 2012, covered those, and then has been doing that since then. And then spent some time actually with candidate Trump when he was running for the presidency, weekend accidentally at Mar-a-Lago, and is on the blacklist of journalists who are not allowed to go to the rallies, presidential rallies. And
I want to go back and revisit that with you a little later in the show here in terms of what's happening.
He was presenting on Friday to our students.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And you had a student who brought up a particular idea.
What was interesting to me, and I'm looking at the comment that he made, he talks about what he enjoyed about that is that Coppins appears to not have a overinflated self-image.
He was
a very real down-to-earth person. But the thing that struck me at the most was he said, "I'm glad this was offered as extra credit. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone. But I was really enlightened and learned quite a bit from the questions and answers that were given. I was one of those people who were kind of against the media. because I thought that they just say things for money and for attention. But after meeting this guy, I could tell there are reporters and news organizations that genuinely love what they do.
So what was so stunning about that? You used a different word, actually, yesterday when we were talking about
right.
this.
It occurred to me that, see, you and I are older, and we grew up trusting the media. I mean, to a certain extent, when we were younger.
Some of us are older than others here.
Okay. But I'm older than you, and we're older than most of our students, right?
Right.
So we grew up in the age where you could listen to the nightly news and have a lot of confidence in the credibility of the news organizations.
Right.
So, but it occurred to me when he said this, I'm one of those who were kind of against the media. I thought, oh my goodness, you know, this idea of fake news and disreputable news organizations for a younger generation might, you know, because this is their first experiences to the media, seriously. So maybe they are developing this viewpoint that you can't trust the media. I mean, and that's their basic gut relationship to the media.
Right.
And if that's the case, it's frightening, and I said the word insidious. It's an insidious situation that's now taking whole root in our country, if that's the case.
Well, one of the pressing reasons why is because of the channels that people are getting their media through. It's no longer being transmitted through traditional channels, even though they still exist. In terms of the old media, ABC, NBC, CBS, broadcast news channels, that you can still pull down out of the air if you happen to have the setup to, you know, to pick up a broadcast signal. That's what we were fed, really. When Walter Cronkite said, and that's the way it is, we had no reason to not believe him. Mainly because he was more than just a sitting anchor or a reader, as they're called in Great Britain. He was in the trenches. He was in Vietnam. He knew the stories, and we had no reason to go through and say, well, I'm not sure if I really trust your sources, or how much are you just making this up, or are there sponsors going through and framing what it is that you're reporting and the way you're saying it? We didn't, because we hadn't become that critical at that point. I think the critical point for us, for our generation, was the 24-hour news cycle introduced to us by CNN, and what cable news was going to do, and how that shifted much of the audience away from the traditional outlets like CBS, NBC, ABC, and then looking at not only CNN, but then MSNBC came along, certainly Fox News, and got into this 24-hour news cycle. So no longer were we tied to this idea of the 5 o'clock or the 6 o'clock or the 10 o'clock or 11 p.m. news, as many of us still are in terms of our local news, KSL, KUTV, KTVX, that kind of thing. We could tune in at any given time. And that being the case, with more information than being fed to us, we kind of also gave up on the idea of being critical with that information.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me is, juxtaposed against this comment from the student, I had just before I saw you yesterday, I had come visiting a friend. It's in my age group.
Right.
She's living with an older woman that's a relative, and so she's staying in this older lady's house, and the older lady has the television on all the time, which a lot of people do in their homes, no matter what age they are, but is a consumer of Fox, the Fox News Network, or Fox Network.
Consumers, it sounds like it's intravenously.
Well, the thing of it is that it's a non-stop vitriol against another point of view. You call it maybe the liberal point of view, or the left point of view, or some other point of view that Fox feels like it needs to push back against. A non-stop vitriol against that point of view. And I found myself, when she was rehearsing to me some of the coverage that she's getting fed to her, really, like you say, almost intravenously, I thought it sounded very distressing to me to be subjected constantly to this negative and polarizing content.
Right.
So you've got my student who's suspect of all media and against the media, or was against the media, and has this jaundiced viewpoint, and then there's this other broadcast system, which to me sounds horrendous to be constantly having to listen to. Why do people do that voluntarily to themselves? I don't know. I don't understand.
Well, I think it, on the surface level, it lessens loneliness to have somebody talking in the background.
To have the TV
regardless
on.
if it's Fox
Okay.
News or
Okay.
reruns of, your favorite sitcom or whatever the case might be. But
the negativity.
it still sinks in.
It's the negativity that is
The
just
brain remembers
nonstop.
everything it hears.
I know. I don't know why.
So let me drop the other
Yeah.
shoe then on what I
Right.
was getting to in terms of your student and his comment.
Okay.
Because now we're dealing with individuals who get their most of their news feed through social media channels, through Facebook, through Instagram, through especially through Twitter, that goes through and becomes an aggregation of many different types of news that are out there, and most of which are questionable in terms of their credibility. But because they are still designated as some kind of channel, okay, being a social media channel, there's still obviously credibility given to what that story might be. Now, you talked about the idea that this journalist you saw on Friday started off, or at least was picked up by BuzzFeed in order for him to do his political reporting.
Right. He didn't have a shot at
He
it
did-
at Newsweek,
at Newsweek,
because
and
he was not
Little
lack of
too
seniority.
far down that ladder
Sure.
there as it goes, and
Sure.
I sure get that. And BuzzFeed at the time was very little more than the top 10 reasons why you think this is the most incredible thing you've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Cat videos.
You're not
in
going to believe what's
particular.
going to happen next. And it was very difficult for me, at least, to make that shift to BuzzFeed and go, and to take them seriously as a news outlet. And now they're a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and he did make that good analogy to a student who asked about their credibility at BuzzFeed. He said it's like CBS or NBC. They have a network, and they run sitcoms, and they run reality shows, and they have a news broadcast. You don't look at their news broadcast and question its credibility because of their reality TV shows and their sitcoms.
Right.
It's a network.
Right.
And he said BuzzFeed should be viewed in the same light.
But it can't be. Now, you told me that yesterday, and I've kind of incubated on that a little
Okay.
bit. It can't be, and here's the reason why. It's because of the temporal context. We're very linear in how we go through and consume our information. And we've been conditioned through traditional media channels. So we have Good Morning America comes on in the morning. We have a news show. We have an evening news show that we might be paying attention to. If you log on to BuzzFeed, it's all there at the same time. There's not that linear nature to it. We don't compartmentalize and go, oh, we're talking about news now, or we're talking about the top 10 reasons to love broccoli.
You mean because we're just not intentional? And we're just kind of lackadaisical about our consumption?
We definitely are very lazy about our consumption. We're just letting it spoon feed us based on our own Google and Facebook algorithms that have figured out what we already like. So we're living in those echo chambers to begin with, and everything that's filtered coming in. So we've surrendered ourselves to that, certainly. But the whole interface of social media is completely contrary to the interfaces that we were used to in terms of traditional media. In terms, even CNN coming along with a 24-hour news cycle was so weird to us. And they came up with another channel called Headline News that would run the headlines I think it was every 60, if not every 30 minutes. They would come up and they would tape the show and they would repeat the tape maybe 30 or 90 minutes into that news cycle, and then as something else broke, it would become updated that way. And yet today you can't watch any of these channels, MSNBC, Fox News, or CNN, without having a ticker running down at the bottom level of the screen here, indicating some kind of breaking news, as if we're like, oh, well, I must pay attention. They're pulling me in once again because this is breaking news as opposed to all the tripe I've been listening to for the last 5 hours this
Right,
morning.
and the repeated video play over. Now,
it drives me
how would
crazy.
you describe your personal relationship to that phenomenon?
Well, I think I just described it.
Because I would concur.
It's lunacy.
My perception of you is that you're kind of addicted to breaking news. I mean, you told me the other day.
My name's Eric, and I'm addicted to breaking news.
You are. You told me you had an alert on your phone that woke you
I do.
up in the middle of the night
I have,
when that shooting
I
in Las
have
Vegas happened.
right.
And in the middle of your sleep, when you were supposed to be getting your 8 hours that you need desperately to be healthy
I'll sleep
and
when I'm
sane,
dead.
okay, you had it wake you up in the middle of the night. Now, me, on the other hand, I don't know if I'm an extreme opposite of you, but I keep the media at arm's length. Okay, and I certainly like that whole thing on the government shutdown.
But,
days and days before. Is it going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Is it going to happen? I'm like, you guys, just, it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. And then I'm going to deal with the result after it happens.
That's complete. A government shutdown is, in terms of its shelf life and its newsworthiness, it's old news.
But how much space did it occupy in the...
Well, you know what it did? It replaced that one guy who ran for office, and he didn't make it because there were some kind of accusations that were brought against him in terms of his sexual inappropriateness. What was? Oh, Roy Moore. Remember Roy Moore?
Oh, you mean it covered up Roy Moore's story?
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what that news cycle does. Is okay. If we're not paying attention, we're gonna miss out on what it is that's going on. But that's not what I wanted to say.
Well, we are describing a phenomenon that we're dealing with.
I used to report, and it's still in my blood in a way to go through and look and see what's going on. Yeah, my phone, I have an AP feed, I have a Reuters feed that comes through. AP is the only one. AP is the only one that has an alarm on it that wakes me up because I trust what the AP is going to feed to me in that respect. And if they felt it necessary to go through and put it up in terms of push notification, then it's going to gather my attention there for what it's worth. Okay. Now, granted, like when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, I had every screen in the house up and on. And I watched all the networks, and I watched most of my trusted feeds in terms of the social media feeds that were out there. And the difference is it was an incredible education to me, not that I was surprised by it, but to see who was speculating, who thought they had the exclusive in terms of the story, and who felt that they needed to wait until they had some solid information to go through and report that. You know who that was?
Who?
It was CBS.
Okay, the mainstream traditional
it was
broadcast
CBS
media.
who sat on their hands and said, we have reporters out, we're trying to figure it out, but we're not going to tell you anything until we know what really went on. While CNN sat there with a booth on the corner because they were already there for the marathon, went through and capitalized on all of their assets being focused on the Boston Marathon, turning that over into the coverage, and then giving us nothing but speculation for hours. Even after they caught Timmy, I can't remember his name, they were still speculating on in terms of what had happened there. And all they did was mislead us the whole time. As a result of this concept of it's exclusive, it's new, we're the only ones bringing this to you in that respect. So there's something sacrificed along the way that the 24-hour news cycle has done to us. It's bored us.
Allowed it to do to us.
We have. It's bored us into a point of complacency, and we're stimulated only when we see that runner happening at the bottom of the screen saying breaking news. We go, what's happening? Because I must be informed to see what's going on. Now, I'm with you. We don't have to be.
You're right. It's a choice that we make.
Hardly a man wakes from an afternoon's nap and asks, what's the news? Henry David Thoreau wrote in his book, Walden. And his idea was, well, you've seen one government shutdown, you've seen them all. I don't know if I agree with that completely, because obviously there's contextual nuance that's going to be happening. When this government shutdown happened, I happened to be on an Army base with my daughter.
And it did actually hit you right in the face.
Right there, at that moment.
Right.
So I had a completely different context for that shutdown as I did to the one that happened several years ago.
But at least it was the reality of it happening and not all the speculation around happening before.
My point being is, when did we get to a point of not being able to live without knowing what the hell's going on? You're obviously still there.
Well, you know, if you look at a historical perspective, it's when we invented the telegraph, actually. When we could send news or information across the country inexpensively and really cheap, like Twitter. Okay, that's when the news and information became...
Yeah, I go a little farther than the telegraph,
okay.
maybe, in terms of the newspaper, in terms of print, and what we were able to distribute at that time. But the technology didn't drive it, though. It was the consumption of that.
Well, no. Think about the product creating a need in people and a desire in people to consume it. So,
I disagree. I think capitalism created that need in people. I think somebody selling you the news created that.
Right.
As soon as Edward R. Murrow smoked a cigarette on live television and then became an advocate of that particular brand, we switched gears in terms of, not only is he a trusted reporter, but he's also smoking the same brand that I'm smoking, kind of thing. We became more endeared. We wanted to know what the next product was. We wanted to make sure that our shopping choices were validated, if not inspired, by what it was that we were watching. And at that point, news lost its objectivity.
Well, okay, so we identified what we consider to be a problem in the media landscape, which would be meaningless or unhelpful information, a plethora of that, and then maybe our lazy habits as consumers about not being picky enough about what we eat or consume in terms of media, and
that created the perfect storm. For President Trump to come along and say fake news. And he's not the first one to go through and say that, okay? But he's the one who popularized the idea. Because if it was against him, it was very convenient for him to go through and dismiss it completely. Or to blacklist reporters who happened to be getting close to the truth about what was going on, to shut them down. For the first time in the history of this country, we have an individual who is actively contradicting the First Amendment of freedom of speech and a free press.
Well, President Nixon tried to do that.
Certainly,
with the release of the
and
Pentagon
it could be argued that
Papers.
Obama did as well. But those were more specific concepts. Obama was from a standpoint of, I need to control more in terms of national security, what it is that I'm putting out there. Agree or disagree, that's where he was coming from. Nixon, for obvious reasons, he was trying to go through and divert, which is the habit that we're seeing currently within this president that way. So I guess what I'm saying is, everything has come to a point in terms of the 24-hour news cycle and now mediated, social mediated, how am I saying this? Socially mediated news content. And then we have a very charismatic leader who goes through and says, well, if they're against me, then it's got to be fake news, for us to go through and start to discredit the Fourth Estate. And that's dangerous for us to go through and do.
Well, and it's tricky because all you need are a few examples of unethical or poor behavior on the part of...
Sure, they were popping up. Dan Rather.
Right, that whole coverage of President Bush and the National Guard.
National Guard.
Right.
And yet, to Dan Rather's credit, that wasn't his reporting. He just happened to be the guy on 60 Minutes who was the reader or the talking head, reading the teleprompter and going to camera that way. But shame on him for not validating what it was that he was getting into, because he is a reporter. Okay, back before the days that he was sitting behind a teleprompter, he was in Vietnam, he was in Korea.
Well, he was trusting his producer and the sources he was getting, and then like Brian Williams exaggerating, you know. I mean, and you know, a person could be 99% of the time functional and effective, and then have a lapse in judgment or make a mistake, and then you have this problem of a lack of credibility. And all you need is, like you said, a charismatic figure that promotes this notion. And I guess I'm concerned because you and I have been around long enough, our generation, to have seen lots of good examples and to have a fundamental trust and respect for the media. But if you're a younger person and you're growing up in this environment, which is just bashing the media left and right, then the thing is, we're a democracy, and we have to have a connection to legitimate media in order to trust that we're getting information,
democracy
that we can make informed decisions.
Cannot happen without it.
Right.
It cannot happen without the Fourth Estate.
Right. And if you have a population that doesn't believe the media, they can't make decisions.
So who is believable? The whole point of our show is to go through and say, here's what we think. I posted a local, a state, and a national reporter on our Facebook feed, and you can go through and take a look at that and see, two of which happen to be alumni. What's the plural of that? Alumnus of our program. So I'm obviously going to have my biases there. One is Emily Havens, who reports for the Spectrum, and I read everything that she puts out there, and she's on the nose with her content and her objectivity in what she's doing. She just recently released a story. It's on the Spectrum. It came out yesterday. If you get a chance to go through and take a look at it, I would encourage you to do so. That looks at racism in here in our county, especially over the past Martin Luther King celebration. What happened during that time? I was stunned to go through and read what she had put up there.
Well, so while you're talking about Emily, because we're going to talk about some other journalists as well.
We only have 5 minutes, so.
Holy smokes! Okay, but we want to address. You mentioned objectivity, right? Would you say that we all have a bias. Would you say you've identified any bias on this reporter or journalist?
She's a feminist.
Okay, so she's leaning towards the women's rights, and those issues are...
But is that a bias? Is it a lens? What do we call that?
Okay.
In terms of, it doesn't mean she's a man-hater.
Okay.
And for some people, if I say feminist, that's what they translate that into. But
that's not what you mean by it.
That's not what I mean by it, and certainly that's not what she means within her reporting. Okay. There, she's very equal opportunity. Katie McKellar, who writes for the Deseret News, another graduate of our program, she gets into some of the real sticky state legislative issues that are going on, and she pulls off the gloves and reports what's going on. And it's the Deseret News, and so there's an inherent bias with that, and yet Katie doesn't let their infrastructure go through and influence the way she reports the news and see what's going on.
I love that you're pointing out that when the reporter is ethical, it matters who they write for, who their boss is, who signs their paychecks, but it's not it doesn't have to be the determining factor. Right. So they can take a view that might be contrary to the board of directors or the advisory board of an organization. So thank you for pointing that out.
Well, the structure of the organization is just as important as how we view the reporters who are reporting within it, because we have to understand what those biases might be inherently, what those influences might be inherently. That's the reason why I quit my last reporting job, was because the general management wanted me to go through and say certain things about one of their advertisers, and I'm a reporter. I'm not going to go through and endorse anybody from that, so that was it. It was gone. My national pick is a guy by the name of Don Gagné, and he's with National Public Radio, with NPR. And Don Gagné has a long history of reporting. He was a part of the White House correspondence back in the days of George W. Bush, and then he left that post in 2010 during the Obama administration. He's been overseas. He's got this wealth of experience and information to bring, for me, the trusted lens that I want to understand what's happening on the American political scene. There.
So one of your criteria for valuing someone's opinion is a breadth of experience and a depth of experience.
Yeah, and so that might sound contradictory to what I was talking about with Emily and Katie, because they're fresh out of the gate. But what I'm saying with them is their ability to be clearly open-minded on the topics that they're getting into, and to put it all out there, and to have it well supported, well founded.
Okay, so they back up their claims or their points of view with substantial information.
And they articulate it very well too. They're good writers there. And Don Gagné is a good writer, even though he's a radio personality. He writes for the ear and has the ability to go through and to get us to understand it more than anything, to reach some level of shared meaning.
Context.
Absolutely.
He's really good at context.
Yeah. All three of them are.
Okay, well that's very, very important. In communication studies, we say that the context is equally as important as the text itself.
Well, context is where we derive meaning. And if we don't understand context, then we're not going to arrive at shared meaning. If something's taken out of context, we're clueless there in that respect.
Right, or if we lack enough context to interpret it.
We're coming down to the wire once again
here. That's okay. It just flew by.
It did. Are we still broadcasting on? Because I'm not seeing it.
It's like a wild horseback ride.
Facebook. If you have a favorite you'd like to add to our list here, feel free to go through and let us know. We'll put them up. I think you can do it directly onto the feed, or you can comment on the show itself. It seems to have disappeared off our feed. I'm hoping it's there someplace.
Temporarily, okay.
Next week, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I have a feeling we're not finished maybe with this subject.
Okay. Yeah. We might spill over into next week. So we appreciate you joining us. We'll be back on YouTube and on our Facebook page and on the CEC channel 22 at Wednesdays at 9:30 with Talking Point Live, coming to you from the campus of Dixie State University. I'm Eric Young.
You sound like you're on speed this morning.
Jennifer
Kohler.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you later on.